Hi, everyone. I'm Julia with the Berkeley Judicial Institute, back with another installment of Judges in the Community. Today, we're joined by Judge Carparelli, Justice Gabriel, and Judge Krieger here to share the inspiring civic engagement work they have done in Colorado. Good afternoon, judges. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be here. I can't wait to dive into your journey and insights. But just to start out, would you mind briefly sharing a little bit more about who you are, where you sit, and your personal judicial history? Judge Krieger, would you like to start us off?
I'll start us off. And that's probably because I'm the oldest of the three of us, is my guess. I am a federal district judge. I'm in senior status now. I served in the District of Colorado and was the chief judge of the District of Colorado. I met Judge Carparelli and Justice Gabriel actually before I became a federal district judge, probably when I was on the bankruptcy bench. And it was in those early discussions that Carparelli and I and a mutual friend of ours, the late Ellie Greenberg, who we all talked about what we needed to do to help educate people about the court system.
Hi, I'm Russ Carparelli. I am retired. I was a judge on the Colorado Court of Appeals. And before that, actually, I was in the United States Air Force, where I was a trial court judge and later a judge on the Air Force Court of Criminal Appeals.
And Justice Gabriel?
I'm Rich Gabriel. I'm currently a justice on the Colorado Supreme Court, where I have served since September of 2015. Before that, I served as a judge on the Colorado Court of Appeals from 2008 to 2015. And relevant here, I have served as the chair of the executive committee of the Out Courts program for approximately the last 10 years. And I serve as the chair today.
Thank you all so much for your amazing introductions. It is such an honor to meet each and every one of you. So now diving right into the core of our conversation today, what project are you here to share with us and where did it all begin? Maybe circling back to Judge Krieger, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Actually, the idea for this program began at a lunch that Judge Carparelli and I were having after a state court election for retention of judges. In Colorado, judges are retained by election, but they are not initially selected by election. They are appointed by the governor and they serve for specified terms. When those terms elapse, then the population can vote to retain them or not. Both of us were lamenting the fact that we had stood in polling lines listening to people talk about how they voted against the judges every time because they didn't know them, they didn't know anything about them, and they didn't know why they should retain them. So we got to talking about the need for education for Colorado citizens about the court system. And that started out as a retention issue. In other words, how judges are selected, how they serve, how they're retained or not, and how they're evaluated. But it grew beyond that into a much more holistic program, including civics and how government works, both in the United States and in Colorado, and particularly in comparison to each other.
What we decided was that that there was a need for a public education program, but how do you do that? And the initial concept was that it would be a sort of a speakers bureau, but the problem with a speakers bureau is you just wait for the phone to ring and it might never ring. And so what we wanted was to do an active outreach two audiences that needed speakers for their lunches. We considered doing our own programs and realized we didn't have the resources to create programs and to get audiences to come to us. And so we decided we'd go to the audiences. And so Rotary clubs, the Lions clubs, the Kiwanis, et cetera, meet regularly. They come together, they are an audience, and frankly, they are people who are actively involved in their communities. Who better to talk to and to talk about the court system? These are people who could give us a multiplier effect and tell other people about it. And so then we need speakers, of course. And the question, our notion was, we would have judges and lawyers give the presentations. Those are the people who know this information. But my experience as a judge was that we're all quite busy. We don't have time to go find audiences to speak to. Maybe we go to our son's or daughter's third grade class or whatever. But when say an adult friend would invite us to a group, who would be, well, who is this group? What are they interested in? Am I available on the day they are wanting me to come? And do I have time to organize my thoughts and put a presentation together? And so what we decided was that we would initially create the content and to do it with PowerPoint presentations such that the content and the structure of it would be uniform for those who attended, but each judge or lawyer who gave the presentation would still be able to give it in their own voice. And so we set out, and it took us probably 9 months as we created the entity, as we created the initial programs, the initial presentation, and as we contacted judges and gave them training, invited them to participate and trained them, and as we began our outreach to these communities. We ran sample programs in the fall of 2007, and indeed we worked with communications experts to give us feedback. In the beginning of 2008, we were ready to go, and we reached out. We began reaching out and gave our presentations, and the response was wonderful. We immediately had a great demand for our programs, and the program just took off.
Can I add something at this point, Russ? It was important that we had Ellie Greenberg in the early days because she was a community organizer. Mm-hmm. She had set up a number of programs where she engaged community partners to work with us. And she went out to the community in a number of respects, to the community colleges, to the libraries, to the professional groups, meaning the bar associations, the courts, and these people began to be our support system. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we did is in our very early days, we were focused on adults and adult learning. And this turned out to be sort of a distinguishing feature for a long time because there are many programs that teach about civics to kids. But we started out really restricting ourselves to adult audiences. And since then, of course, our courts has spread across the state and has many, many programs in different languages and reaching different groups, and has indeed incorporated high school education as well.
I'm a rookie. I can add a couple of things to what my friends have said here. When the project was created, we started with a mission that we provide nonpartisan information to adult audiences. And that was important, that there are a lot of groups that provide partisan information, but we wanted to be different, that we're just here to provide information. And as what was at some level a judge's speakers bureau, we cannot take political positions on any issue, on any ballot issue, on any political issue. And that was something that was, I think, an important part of the brand that we developed. We're going to come and provide information, and we're judges. I happen to think, and I think we all agree, very important for judges to get out of your chambers and be transparent and interact in the community. People love to meet with judges. We make a bit of a joke out of this, but most people never see a judge other than your traffic ticket and perhaps your divorce. And what we do is mysterious to people. And so we get out. I mean, how many people get to meet the chief judge of the federal district court, or a judge of the Court of Appeals, or a justice of the Supreme Court? And we go out and we just talk to people. So that mission was very important. When we started with just one program, which we called our state courts. It was about the state court merit selection system. We select our judges by merit. In Colorado, you don't run in a political campaign. You go through a nominating commission process and then are nominated to the governor. And so, as my friends indicated, we recognized early on people didn't understand how we select and retain judges in this state. Studies show that many people leave the judges blank on their ballot because they don't know what to do with it. It just says, should Justice so-and-so be retained, yes or no? Many voters, in the order of 20 to 30% vote no on every judge every time. And they didn't know where to have information. So that was our principal goal. And as my friends indicated to you, what we started with, we created the program. We did professional focus groups on the program and got feedback. We cared deeply about language that we used. By way of example, studies showed that people react negatively to the concept of an independent judiciary because it sounds like you're not beholden to anybody. So we use language like fair and impartial judiciary, things that resonate more. Once we developed the program, we said, okay, now what? And we reached out to the low-hanging fruit, service clubs that were looking for speakers. And as Judge Carparelli said, the response was extremely enthusiastic and immediately enthusiastic. And that led to creation of other programs. They came back and said, that was great. Have you got anything else? And we could talk about the development of additional programs, as well as the school program and our diversity outreach, if you would like to get into that.
One of the other interesting things about this program or this project is that it trains its speakers. Now, I can comment about that with regard to the federal judiciary. There is no training for judges in the federal judiciary in speaking to lay people or in speaking to the press. And what we wanted to do is to make sure that all of our judges were equipped with skills to maintain their ethical standards and stay within the lines while teaching about the process. And those are very important distinctions that are probably the subject of great discussion at BJI even now.
And an important part of that relates to what I said. I mean, we can't take political positions. Our programs are designed to be interactive, and we want people to have discussion. But you might end up in a presentation, and we've had great success of people being very courteous and professional, but you might get someone who wants to engage in a political conversation with you. And we have to train judges to know how to answer that question. And Judge Carparelli really developed the techniques for doing that, so I can let him speak to it. But that's the import of the training, to make sure, even when we have attorneys who are speaking who are not judges, our brand is nonpartisan, not political, and we need everyone on the same page.
And our design really was interdisciplinary. So, for example, as Judge Krieger is saying, we trained our speakers Another reason that we trained our speakers was for a consistent quality. You know, if you like Oreos, you know that every time they're going to be the same. Well, if someone likes one of our presentations and goes to another group and invites one of us to give a presentation, it might not be the same person, but we want the same quality. And so it was very important to us that our speakers understood that the content and the structure was there, that we checked it for accuracy and we checked it for ethical compliance, and they are free to speak in their own voice. Communications, we used professional communications consultants to help us design the presentations. We used audio and visual. We have in the PowerPoints, we avoid wordiness. We avoid having big masses of words. We use just bullets and we use graphics. The point I want to make is that we really wanted a very professional product, but we also knew that our training is not in doing that. And so we reached out to others and we did our research to make sure that we were creating something using information that's available in other disciplines.
And you may be interested to know, your BGI may be interested to know, we've trained on the order of 400 speakers at this point. Many, many speakers are trained to do this.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. And I know you all touched upon how this project kind of evolved over time, but I was wondering, were there any specific roadblocks or inspirations along the way that kind of pushed it to the next level, or, how this amazing collaboration has grown to what it is today? Maybe Judge Carparelli, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Well, early on, as we've said, the response was wonderful, and we kept up with the demand, but there was great demand. But eventually, the service clubs that were many and most of our audiences, they had seen the presentations, and the invitations started to drop off. And at that point, we did not go back to the service organizations and repeat what we had done in the beginning. We were evolving our presentations, adding new presentations, but then we had retreats to talk about, okay, how do we keep this alive and how do we keep it going? And we brought in facilitator to help us with that, and we evolved it. Very often you create something, you really like it the way it is, but it becomes stagnant. And instead of that, we have avoided that. And the other thing is the leadership, the committee, the executive committee leadership. We've been very lucky. The leadership has stayed involved. I mean, we have brought in new people. Some of us have not stayed on the executive committee, but it has been largely Court of Appeals judges, Colorado Court of Appeals judges, that have continued to put energy and their creativity into it. Justice Gabriel, having been in charge of this for an amazing 10 years, has grown it and helped it evolve in ways that I would say, Judge Krieger, you and I never imagined. Good ways.
That's amazing. And then maybe kind of switching to the experience of the participants. Would you, when you reflect on, these participants, whether it be through the adult presentations or other programming towards diverse groups of adults, are there any stories or moments in particular that stand out or speak to the impact that you've been able to make on your community? Maybe just.
Can I address that for just a second? Because I don't want the thought to run away. And that is that there was a critical point in time when we had the Aurora Theater shooting case in Colorado, that we took a risk in deciding that we should educate the press in how the system worked. In other words, what happens in a criminal case? What's the role of voir dire? How is the death penalty issue brought up? How is the issue of incompetence, insanity raised? And what are the standards that apply? With many participants, we put on a program that was broadcast internationally because this was one of the big shooter cases early on. And we had, I remember, people in the vans outside the courthouse who were watching the films of what was presented as the reporters were in the courthouse, and they were communicating back and forth with information about what to expect next or when to appear next. And in talking to many of those reporters later on, I remember in particular the NPR reporter who said this was so valuable because it taught them all kinds of things that made their job easier. Not only information about process, but when they got at the courthouse, how to use their resources so they got the important things covered, but they didn't have somebody sitting in the courtroom all the time. And the reason I mention that is that was the same approach that we took in the Derek Chauvin case here in Minnesota after the death of George Floyd. Working with the federal district court here in Minnesota, we put on a similar kind of program for journalists. And it made a huge difference in the quality of reporting, even though that trial was broadcast on court TV. So I think it's worth mentioning that that is one aspect of what our courts did, building upon its knowledge of how to talk about the critical things in procedure and how courts work to lay people and how to prepare them to receive and evaluate information.
And I can jump in if I might too. I don't want to lose the thread on development of programs that Judge Carparelli talked about. Just so the listeners to this know, we now have something on the order of 14 different presentations. I won't have them all by memory, but one on the state court system or our merit selection system, one on the federal court system. We have a combined program about the federal and state court system. One on the life of a civil case, one on the life of a criminal case, bankruptcy court cases, divorce cases, immigration cases, one on the rule of law, a presentation for legislators, our state courts from state legislators. We've done similar programs that we did for the press for legislators, which are really important. One on essentially we call Civics 101 internally, just to kind of talk about how the three branches of government and how a bill tracks through those. 4 of the presentations have been translated into Spanish, and they are presented by Spanish-speaking lawyers and judges to Spanish-speaking audiences. We've done hundreds of those presentations, particularly in partnership with a community center called Centro San Juan Diego. So I wanted to talk about the development of those programs. I wanted to mention the outreach to legislators. It used to be in the state of Colorado that the majority of the legislature were lawyers. Not anymore. many of the legislators are not lawyers anymore, and what we do in the laws is unique to them or new to them. And so we did an outreach. It was exceptionally well received. I do want to tell one story about response. The reaction, as Judge Krieger said, to the outreach to media, to the journalists, was wonderful. The response from legislators has been wonderful. But the day-to-day stories are also wonderful. Probably my favorite story, and I've probably done 300 presentations or 200 presentations at this point. I did a presentation on the merit selection system, and we talk about how we retain and how we select judges, how we retain judges. And I finished the program. This was, about an hour north of here. I can't remember. It was a service club. And an older gentleman, who must be in his 70s, came up to me and he shook my hand and he said, "Judge, I owe you an apology." And I looked at him quizzically and I said, "Why?" And he said, I am embarrassed to say this, but I'm one of those people who voted no on every judge every time. And having heard this presentation, I'm just deeply embarrassed by the fact that I have done that. I'm sorry that I've done that. And I'm going to take you up on we kind of proposed to him, get involved. And he said, "I'm going to volunteer to be on a nominating commission. You've really inspired me to do that." And that was just one person, but recognizing that we really could change views is very meaningful. And when we do presentations, we'll frequently ask, or we'll have a questionnaire that we give out. How many of you, where would you rate your knowledge of this information before you heard this presentation? And people rate it extremely low. This was new to them. And where do you rate it after? And it's hard to measure success on a program like this, but that's one way to say, okay, we educated people today. Obviously, there are millions of people in this state, and hard to reach all of them, but we're certainly doing our best to get out there and do the best we can. One last point before we don't make it. We do these presentations, but we also prepare written materials. We have done public service announcements in the run-up to retention elections. We have put materials in public libraries, and we just try to get the word out. Our goal here is not to sway anybody on how to vote on anything, but our hope is that when they hear the presentation, they will educate themselves and vote in an educated manner. So I think I cut you off, Russ. I'll turn it back to you.
Right, all right. So part of this that you can take from this is that we started off saying we're going to speak to adults. We're going to speak to adults that are in community organizations. But as we have evolved, you begin to see that there are more audiences, and you begin to try to figure out how do you reach those audiences. The ones with the journalists that Judge Krieger mentioned was Judge Krieger's idea, actually, and it was fantastic at the time. We had it not only in person for local journalists. We did a video of it, as a live video of it, for journalists that in other parts of the country. And we had, Marcia, you may remember better than I, but we had major news organizations online and participating and asking questions remotely. And then, the Spanish speaking community. We have gotten into colleges and university classrooms. The current real challenge is we are doing groups of people of dozens. But how do you reach voters that when there's 3 million voters, how many presentations you do that you reach dozens of people can be a drop in the bucket. And of course, there's the internet that has exploded since we started this. There wasn't quite the same internet back in 2006 and 7 and 8. And we continue to try to find ways to access people through the internet. I'd have to say that it is an extraordinary challenge, because when people do searches, how often are people going to say, "Tell me more about the judiciary," or what are the questions that they ask in order to come across our materials. And indeed, the other aspect of it is we are not creating materials of national relevance. We are creating materials that are relevant in Colorado. And the rule of law presentation is broadly relevant. But most of what we do, we only really want to reach as much as possible in Colorado. Another lesson from all of this is that you need to keep learning. When you create something like this, you're lucky if it takes hold. And then if it takes hold, you have to have the knowledge, the wisdom, the courage to continue to create it, to help it grow.
And if I can contribute to that, or just add to what Judge Carparelli said, yes, we're focused here, but we are willing to share our experience and our ideas with others all over the country. We have been invited to train in other states, their bar associations, their judges, about how we develop this program and how they can develop the program. We share very freely our materials with them on the hope that, the better education, more education nationally, the better all around, particularly in this environment where public institutions are under attack nationally. We need people to understand. And so through Judge Krieger's efforts, we've done a whole bunch of training of federal judges. There's a wonderful video about the Our Courts program on the federal judiciary's educational website. We've done the same for probably 6 or 7 different states to help them create, or at least encourage them create, this kind of program. We've talked at the American Bar Association Education Summit and explained to them what we do. So we're willing to share, and although what we do is most focused on Colorado, we are absolutely delighted to have people tailor their programs to their own jurisdictions. The more, the merrier.
And another thing I would mention is allies. What you find as you do a project like this, that there are people and entities who are particularly interested in what you're doing. They want to know more about it. They want to know how they can help. And so I refer to these people as allies. And early on, there was the American Judicature Society. There was a project known as Justice at Stake. There was certainly the federal help me with this, Marcia. It's in Jeremy Fogel's organization in Washington, the federal.
It was the Federal Judges, or the FJC, the Federal Judicial Center. Yeah.
Federal Judicial Center. Thank you. And through the American Bar Association, other people find out about us. We were invited to Wisconsin. We were invited to Arizona, and people have come visited us. Judge from Kansas came to visit us to learn more about it. The justice from California came to your chambers, Marcia, and we met with her there. And the point is, there is our specifics of our program, but there are also the specifics of our experience of how the program has thrived.
The other thing that we used these materials for, as I reflect on this, is we educated a large number of foreign judicial officers. They came to the state courts, they came to the federal court, and being able to use these programs to explain a system that was totally foreign to them. The idea that we have state courts and we have federal courts is very unusual. And in most countries, there's one court system for the whole country. So this was a tool that could be used in a lot of different venues. And the people who were on the executive committee, Russ in particular and Rich in particular, reached out to various groups inside and outside of Colorado to share the information. Justice Gabriel has recently been awarded an Inns of Court award. And congratulations, Rich, that's just wonderful. And part of that is because he has been active in presenting the Our Courts model and presentation at the 10th Circuit Conference, several different conferences, as a matter of fact. And I think that's a way of sharing information that helps judges understand how they can go into the community and share information with people.
And I'd like to comment on the international impact here because I think it's important. As Judge Krieger said, we've had visitors from Kazakhstan, from Bulgaria, from Mongolia, and done this presentation for them. As a result of that, I actually have visited Bulgaria twice. I spoke to the Bulgarian Judges Association, and they were looking to reform their judiciary, and they were looking at merit selection. This was a country that was communist dominated. And this was a group of judicial reformers, and they were very interested in it. And that has been really just fascinating. I do have to tell a funny story at the risk of embarrassing Judge Carparelli and myself. He and I did a presentation together for Bulgaria, and we thought we were very clever. And we had our PowerPoint translated into using Google Translate, and we were presenting. And one of the slides dealt with when judges are disciplined, how can you remove a judge, or what can a judicial discipline commission do? And one of the things they can do is recommend that a judge be removed from office. And we had the slide translated. We came up on the slide, and we get to that, and the audience breaks out in laughter. We had an interpreter. These were people who spoke very little, if any, English. And we both looked quizzically and like, okay, what are you laughing at? And the slide translated from the commission can remove a judge, recommend a judge be removed from office, to the commission can have the judge killed. And they thought that was very, very amusing.
So it was little more nuanced than that. It said it can have the judge eliminated,
Oh.
which in their experience wasn't the same as saying he could be killed. So
It was a funny moment. One thing, because I know our time is limited, but I do want to make sure that we mention on this video is the high school program that we have developed. When we started, as Judge Krieger and Judge Carparelli mentioned, we were focused on adult audiences. And we thought there are other groups that do student audiences. We don't have the bandwidth to do all these schools. When I became the chair of the executive committee, I felt strongly that there was an opportunity that we were missing. And so I talked to our founders, and we started with a pilot project to go into schools. But we were going to talk to high school seniors, students who are going to be voters imminently. We worked with teachers. We were, I hope, savvy enough to realize that we don't know how to teach high school students. We need input. And we worked with two teachers in particular, one of whom was a retired lawyer, and now she's actually practicing law again, to help us develop the program. We started with our Life of a Criminal Case presentation because it was very interactive. We were told the program, you cannot bring a person in a suit to go lecture students for an hour, they'll be asleep. It needs to be interactive. So we did it as a pilot project, and it was exceptionally well received. I then approached our leadership again, our executive committee, and said, well, what about taking the next step? Can we do something closer to our mission? And we ultimately developed what we have now as our high school program, which is a role-playing exercise. We have students playing the role of applicants for judicial positions, and other students play the role of nominating commissioners, and they conduct the interviews of the applicants. So we provided materials to teachers, we provide lesson plans to teachers, and this is a role where we don't go out and lecture, we go out and facilitate this role-playing exercise. This has also been tremendously successful. We've probably been in 500 classrooms at this point. We started right before the pandemic, and we were getting a whole lot of traction, and the pandemic brought us to a halt. But after the pandemic, we've geared up again. And it's been a remarkable experience. And how do you measure results of this? One thing I can share is watching the students get engaged. They ask serious questions. It is remarkable the kinds of questions that they ask. One that I just sticks with me. A student is playing the role of a nominating commissioner, asks the student playing the role of an applicant, is there a difference between fairness and justice? That's an incredibly deep philosophical question, and that somebody came up with that. And then when we end the program today with the students, they're required to say, who's your first choice of the three candidates and why? And what we see is what we want to see. They talk substance. This person would hit the ground running. This person had a good temperament. This person is applying for the right reasons. And that's very encouraging, and it really inspires confidence in our future. And then we do a survey, 4-question survey we ask the students to fill out. And one of the questions is, would you do this program again next year? I probably have behind me in that drawer 1,000 student evaluations. Out of all of them, one student said they wouldn't do the program again next year. 999 said they would. And they have loved it, and they've loved getting to know about the course. So that's a program we have never intended to replace our focus on adult education. This is a part of adult education. These are students who are going to vote on whether a judge should be retained in office. And the goal is that they vote in an educated way. And this lets them see the process. So I didn't want our time to go by without talking about that program as well. We're very proud of it. And now we've got the 2 tracks running, the adult programs and this high school program. And it's been a way to expand our reach. Our hope, we have this a dream that before every students graduate in high school in Colorado, every student will have seen some version of our courts program. We have a pilot project now running with 2 metropolitan area districts and 2 rural districts to figure out how we can make that dream come true. That's a huge, will we ever achieve it? I'm not sure, but it's a pretty strong goal that we have. And we'd be we'd move the ball forward a great deal if everybody has seen this kind of program before they get out of high school. In a time when we don't teach civics as much as we used to, we don't focus on that. So this is a way of supplementing it. And teachers love having us come in. It's hard because many of them have a curriculum, and they have to teach to a curriculum, and finding the time. So we've made it easy for them. We come in for a day or a class, and it works. So I wanted to share that as well.
The mission of our courts is crucial. Think about it. What did you learn about civics in your pre-college education? Well, you might have learned about the role of the courts simply. You would learn about the 3 branches of government, but you really don't learn anything about what judges do and what characteristics, what qualities do you want in a judge. And of course, our media today don't focus on that, and our politicians don't focus on that. They focus on the outcome of the case. But the fact is that the judges in the United States, far and wide, are hardworking, honest people. We have some 30,000 judges in America, and each day they're not handling the big political questions. They're not handling the questions that are going to be on the front page of the newspaper. They're handling disputes between people, entities, and the government. And in each of those cases, they're just trying to get it right. And more, we need our citizens to understand that, because in order to maintain a civil society, the public has to have confidence in the judicial system, in the system of justice. And the mission is absolutely crucial, and it is a forever mission. It's not like you ever achieve it and then you can stop. It's a forever mission, partly because we always have new people being born and growing up and our society is constantly in need of civic commitment and commitment to the rule of law.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories and experiences. I'm sure many of those who are tuning in on this interview are inspired and as informed as I am. And with that, as a member of the Berkeley Judicial Institute, I want to thank you all so much for the amazing insights on the Our Courts project.